Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show. And if you have not listened to this program before, go check out the archives because we've got all kinds of interesting interviews with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies. And I personally am also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. My guest here today, his name is Chuck Bender. He's the CEO at Attentus Technologies. He's a longtime entrepreneur. Big fan of ending generational poverty, which we'll talk about what that means. For those of you who've listened to this program before, you know I'm an active member of Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, very a big advocate of that organization. And he is, I'll call him like the El Jefe, the president of the Western region of the U.S. He's technically called the regional chair for U.S. West of Entrepreneurs Organization. Incredibly well connected within that organization and totally in his element. You should see the guy. At one of these gatherings, you can tell he just lives it and soaks it up, and it's a joy to watch him thriving in it. So we'll talk about what he's gotten out of that organization and why he's gone so deeply involved in it. This, of course, brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And you go to rise25.com and you can learn all about what we do. All right, Chuck, such a pleasure to have you here today. And in your words, you grew up a poor boy, didn't have a lot of money. And I'm really interested to know how that shaped you as you were growing up and some of the ways that you learned these lifelong lessons that obviously shaped the rest of the way that you operated and the companies you started. So tell me about your upbringing.
Well, I was born in California, Southern California, relocated to Arizona when I was right at that middle school, moving from sixth grade into seventh grade, which was a really awkward transition. We always struggled financially as a family. I think my father's highest grade completed was maybe 9th or 10th grade. My mom was really intelligent, hardworking, but didn't have a lot of opportunity. She was the oldest of 6 kids, and they got married when they learned about me, kind of coming along the way, and tried to build a life together. So I would say that for me, the most important things I learned growing up, or probably what sticks with me the most and informed my decision making, is that money equals freedom, and that's about it, right? And, not having it, I just saw my parents struggle every day. Everything seemed hard. And I remember my dad always talking about how life is so hard when you get out on your own. And that was this thing that for me, I just watched how tough it was in my childhood. And I thought, man, it can't be much harder than this, right? So, it basically stripped back a lot of I don't know if fears is the right word, but I didn't have anything to lose. So, I'd go out and take a chance because I really didn't have anything to lose,
Yeah.
So I think that really informed me quite a bit in terms of wanting to change that. As I've gotten older, what I've noticed is the people from my neighborhood that really escaped and have built really good lives for themselves and their families really had learned along the way that it's not really that hard to go out and get yourself into a good middle class opportunity in this country. But what they learned right away was that they had to take control of their own situation instead of making excuses for why they couldn't do it. And I think for me, that was probably the most valuable lesson that I've learned, is that doesn't matter what cards you're dealt. You just got to play the hand. You got to play the hand the best you can, and you'll get more hands if you play the one you got. There's another deal coming all the time. So what you have today isn't what you're always going to have.
And were you the kind of kid who was out there hustling, working at a young age or starting little micro businesses at 8, 9, 10 years old?
I was always hustling. So I remember probably my first gig beyond a paper route was back in the late 70s during the gas line crunches. It's kind of funny. We're dealing with gas again today, but in the late, mid 70s, you could only get gas every other day. And it was based on whether you had an odd or even number on your license plate, and the lines would be miles long in the summertime. And I take my little brother and sister and my wagon wheel, and I'd go buy water. And I was literally having my sister and brother go up and down the car line. Listen, I'm 8, my sister's 5, cute as hell, right? Just a little girl. And my little brother is just toddling along, and we're selling water in this gas line, just trying to figure out how we could make a buck. But I would say my first real business that I did was after we moved to Arizona. My dad was in the shoe repair business, so he was a shoe repair tradesman and minority partner in the shoe repair store. And he fired me because I was a terrible shoe repair kid when I was 12. Apparently, I was ruining more shoes than I was fixing. But he basically he wanted me to come and work and learn a work ethic, right? So he suggested that I build a shoe shine box and go shine shoes. And I'm like, well, why not? I'll try that out. Well, it wasn't long before, gosh, I would say 1979, 80, 81, 82. During the summers, I was making more money than both of my parents combined shining shoes. So I would literally, in Prescott, Arizona, there's this place called Whiskey Row. It surrounds the courthouse in the downtown center. It's like a traditional old town, right? I knew all the owners of the bars, and I would literally go in the front door, go through the bar, shining shoes, go out the back door, and just do this whole zigzag pattern up and down Whiskey Row. Then I'd hit all of the courthouse offices, all the judges, the police station was right there, the sheriff's office was right there. So all the attorneys, all the lawyers, all the judges, all the police officers, and most of the cowboys knew me from the time I was a little, like 12, 13, 14-year-old. So when I started getting into trouble when I was 16, it really served me well. But there were many times where, that we'd have some financial struggle because the economy, inflation was 9%, it was nuts. We're kind of feeling that again, really. It's kind of an interesting time.
And did you end up having to help the family in some way because you're making money?
Many times. We had a single wide trailer. It was I think 60 feet long, and the mortgage was $123 a month on this thing. And there were several times where my shoe shine money got it out of foreclosure. Wow! Because we were about to lose the trailer. That's how rough it was for a time.
Were you resentful of that?
I think I was embarrassed by it. Resentful is probably the wrong word. I think I was just embarrassed. I think there was this, when we lived in California, we at least had a house. It was a really small house. And I remember when we first moved to Arizona and we moved into this trailer, I just remember thinking to myself that I'm just never going to have any friends come to my house, right? It was just embarrassing. And ironically, I'm a little ashamed to say that today because I know my parents were just doing the best they could at the time. With the tools that they had available and what they had been taught, which honestly, I don't think, when we talk about generational poverty, I think that what we're often taught by our parents is how to think about opportunity. And if we're taught by our parents that opportunity doesn't exist because pick reason X, Y, Z, it doesn't really matter what the reason is. But if we believe that, if we come to believe that there is no opportunity, we really limit ourselves in so many ways. And I think the difference between families that are a little bit more affluent, that have more opportunities, that we're always teaching about opportunity, right? The world is your oyster. You can crack it open. Every door is wide open. It's funny. I just put this poster on both a couple of my kids' walls with growth mindset versus, limited mindset, and kind of like trying to teach them some of those principles. Yeah, it's great. Like both of my kids, when they started high school, I remember sitting them down and just saying, hey, listen, today, every single door is wide open for the rest of your life. You're starting your freshman year and every door is wide open. And what you do over the next 4 years is going to close some of those doors, right? Now it's up to you to close those doors. Now it's up to me. My job as your parent is to try and help you keep as many of those doors open as possible. So you should understand my motivation is to help you with that. Right. Now, what you decide to do with your time and how you focus your energy and the results and outcomes that you generate over this period of time is really going to create a fork in the road for you in about 4 years.
And I want to ask you about your kids, but before we get to that, there's one thing you mentioned. I've noticed I ask a lot of these interviewees about this when they're a kid, and a lot of people start entrepreneurial businesses, but there's a real distinction between the ones that start some kind of hustle that is just them, and those that bring in others like siblings and friends and start employing them. And they definitely have a leg up when they get to adulthood and they start real businesses, because they've already realized the power of bringing in others and having it not just be them doing the work. And it sounds like for you said you brought in your sister on those gas lines. So you already you'd already realized the value of that, and then you had to make it bigger than just you.
Yeah, I would say that there's a principle that I don't remember where I learned it, but it's the OPE, OPT, OPM. Other people's time, other people's energy, and other people's money is the key to massive opportunity and success, right? So, and I would add today that I'll make a joke. OPP, other people's passion, right? So, but
you mean tapping into other people's passion, what they're passionate about is a way to make money if they're passionate.
Their passion for their lives, their opportunities. I have a soft spot for the underdog, the kid that grew up like I did, right? I used to joke that, I use these acronyms. A PSD degree was always the people who I found that I connected with the most, and I felt like worked the hardest. And what I call a PSD degree is basically someone who was poor, someone who was smart, and someone who was deeply determined to change that. Right. You find that person and you put a little fuel on the fire, give them a little guidance, and they can set the world on fire.
I do want to get into that because, you obviously aren't poor now, and you've raised kids that weren't poor, or that were in a family that wasn't poor. And I want to talk about some of the things that you did in order to adapt to that, raising kids in affluence. Before we do, though, you mentioned you started to get in trouble when you were 16. Tell me a little bit about that.
What seems to go hand in hand with poor is a lot of abuse. I was a very angry young man. As I hit 16, the constraints of all of the things that people were telling me and trying to hold me back just made me very angry. And I acted out in a lot of ways, not really in education, but I actually moved out. So at 16, I sat down with my dad and I literally said to him, this is on the I can remember it on the front of the trailer, the hitch on a mobile home, still on our hitch. And I remember sitting on it and I looked at him and I said, Dad, you've told me my entire life how hard it is. And I just can't imagine it being more difficult than this. So I'm going to move out and I'm going to see if I can't do something and make it a little bit better. And I tell people today, honestly, nearly every day of my adult life has been easier, more purpose-driven than most of the days of my childhood, And I would say childhood really from 12 on, like that part where you hit puberty and you're trying to figure it out and all that. That was, it was for me, I was the oldest in my family. So that was a burden of responsibility of raising my little brother and sister. In fact, my little brother and sister my parents were working 2 jobs and were gone. And they would send me Mother's Day cards, every couple of years. I get these Mother's Day cards from my brother and sister. I was the in a lot of ways, the protector and breadwinner, but I took on all that responsibility. And at 16, I was just ready to go do it for myself for a change.
Yeah. And what was that like moving out at 16? Did you go live at a friend's house? Did you go get an apartment?
So I had a studio apartment and a roommate. So there you go.
Wow. Not a lot of room.
Beds in one room. And
I think that's called prison.
It's kind of, except for I had the key to the lock, right? But I'll tell you, it was exhilarating. But what was interesting to me is what you can do. So nearly every day of my senior year of high school, I had a ride to school, which was about 15 miles away. I'd get a ride in the morning. My car had broken down. And I would get a ride to school with Steve Borg, great guy. We'd get to school, and then I would go through school for half day because that's all I needed to finish graduating. And then I went and worked at Godfather's at night. So I worked from 1 o'clock until 8 or 9, 10, whatever I got off. And then I would hitchhike back home most nights. Most nights I didn't have a ride. So I would literally walk the 3 miles to get back up to the main road to get from Prescott to Prescott Valley, and then hitch a ride and then get back into my apartment, crash, and rinse and repeat. So what I learned there is lots of things are possible, and it's really cold in Prescott in the winter. It's really cold. But I finished. I enlisted in the Navy. That was my way out. That was my how do I get out and actually get someplace where I can start learning a trade. And it's been an iterative process ever since.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people enlist in the military to give them some structure and give them some purpose in life. And is that what it gave you?
Yeah, I would say, I was asked to speak at my Rotary Club a couple of years ago on Veterans Day. And one of the things I try to make a point of is I was in from 84 until 92. So it was Cold War period. For most veterans, they don't see combat. Most veterans are going about the work of supporting the service in one way or another, right? But what it meant for me was I remember the day I graduated from boot camp and could wear my uniform in public and how people looked at me different, right? I was not the kid with high waters that couldn't afford his own clothes. And, I was like somebody who was their own agent. I had agency in a way, and people looked at me differently. And I remember that sense of accomplishment and pride that generated, and just the way I held myself and having my shoulders back and my head up and just being proud of accomplishing something that was not easy. And I think for the most part, I took for granted all the other stuff I'd ever accomplished. That was one that there was a lot of public recognition around it. It wasn't just internal work, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I think I got a lot of, structure I got out of it. From a business perspective, what I think I got the most out of the military was, how do you take a carrier or a ship with 300 people on it, most of them are under 25, make war anywhere in the world, and the systems and processes that are generated. We had every system and process in the Navy back then was on a planned maintenance system. It was a PMS card you had, and you would wake up that day and there would be the card, and this is the card you had to go do to make sure the equipment was going to always work when you needed it to work, right? And it really, I learned a lot about just watching how you could take people who had some knowledge or limited experience and still do amazing process-driven work, right?
Yeah.
And McDonald's is like in the corporate side of the world, everybody talks about McDonald's, but the military's been doing that for 200 years. That's how they do it, which was really fascinating for me. And it enabled me when I got into my business to figure out ways to scale and bring in people that I could help grow instead of I could never afford the highest level person available. I had to take what I could afford and then build them up to be what I needed, right? Yeah.
But I've seen that so many times with veterans turned entrepreneurs, is that they really have that discipline, that focus, that systematization, that sort of thing. All right. So you made the next most logical jump. I mean, this makes clear path, clear trajectory from shining shoes as a poor kid to the Navy, to naturally you go into the dating services industry and matchmaking, logically, right?
Yeah, it was if you read my resume, it made perfect sense, right?
Well, it makes sense in retrospect, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, perfect sense.
So how do you get there?
Well, so there's a principle that was shared with me at one point that I didn't realize I was living when they shared it, but it was actually true. I've always been far more interested in how I want to live than what I want to do, right? In fact, I tell kids today all the time, really reverse engineer the life you want to have, and then figure out what's inside of that to do, as opposed to trying to figure out what you want to do. Because if it doesn't drive you where you want to go, you're going to be unhappy. You're just going to not have a really great life. So for me, what happened was I had actually, right out of the service, went to work as a broker in a financial services business. I didn't know anything about it, but it was 100% commission. I had to write a check to get the job, which was to go get my Series 6, my 63. And I remember sitting in this room with about 30 other people. This is in 1987, right? 88. So just as I was
see what's coming here.
Milken just junk bonds just crashed. Milken was indicted. This was all happening. And I'm
October 87, I think it was, right?
October of 87. Yeah, literally. I got my license in January of 88, right? So kind of give you a sense of what's the timing. And I remember sitting in this room and the guy at the front of the room was saying, listen, the average registered representative here makes about $25,000 their first year. And then their second year, 70, and you kind of goes up from there as you build the client base. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I went home and I was married at the time to my first wife, and I sat down and I'm like, listen, this is 100% commission and scared to death of it. But what they said is the average person makes $25,000. Well, in the Navy, I'm making $16,000 a year now. So that's a huge pay raise. And I think I'm at least average. I think I'm at least average, right? And what I learned in that was how to copy. So I basically would find the guy who was the best guy in the room and just do everything he did. Like, I literally, there was a guy called the Cold Call Cowboy that worked for Merrill Lynch at the time. I think it was Merrill, or it may have been a different firm. And he used to joke about taping the phone to his hand, and then just, he had to make 100 contacts a day and so on and so forth. And I was like, listen, if that guy can do it, I'm a dumb poor kid. I can work hard. So give me a phone and a list and I'll go to work. Right.
Yeah. I'm picturing like the beginning of Wolf of Wall Street. Where
it's so funny how much that resonated with me when I watched the movie. Same thing with, what's the other one? The guy with the balls, like,
Boiler Room. Glenn Ross. Coffees for closers.
Coffees for closers. But what was interesting is I turned it into a system, because for me, I needed to have a positive reason for someone to tell me no, right? So I created these sheets, and they had like a box of $25 signs on them. And then my goal was to cross off 4 of those boxes every day. So if I made 100 contacts, where I talked to 100 individuals I didn't talk to the day before or didn't know, I knew what my numbers were. If I talked to 15, I'd get an appointment. Every 3 appointments, I'd get every appointment I would keep about half of them would actually make an appointment where I would be sitting down with them. And I would close about a third of those. Right. So I had it down to a science where every no made me about $1.20. Right.
Yeah.
So if I needed to make $180, I needed to make 125 or 130 contacts. And and over time, that averaged out to be somewhat true. So it literally, at the end of the day, I would tally up my totals, multiply it by my number, regardless of the outcome, and just say, today I made this much money. And then I would bet against that dollar amount every week. Could I exceed it, or would I come in a little under? Could I exceed it? Or as a result of that, I was rookie of the year my very first year. Out of 7,000 reps, I was the top sales, brand new sales guy. But it was literally just copying what other people had taught me. I'm not particularly creative, but I would just work harder than anybody.
It's interesting though. I mean, I can see, from you being a kid with the shoe shine, going through the bars, can I shine your shoes? No. Can I shine your shoes? No. Can I shine your shoes? Yes. Just kind of the same thing.
Exactly. It wasn't that different, ironically, except for you were selling financial services, right?
Right.
But I remember my first suit. That was the time I bought my first suit, and it was like it was the lamest suit you could buy. It was like one of those mall suit places, the cotton ones. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it was so cheesy. I'm glad I don't have any pictures from then. Funny story. A year later, I was making way more than the $50,000 or whatever it was, and I was buying much more expensive suits and playing the part. And then I had a client who died, who was one of my favorite clients. He was a mentor of mine, actually. And his kids decided that the investment that he'd chosen to go into was an improper investment. And then they tried to sue the company. And then the company who had taught me all this stuff tried to throw me under the bus for it and wanted me to sign this document saying that I was going to accept this thing or that thing. And I just told them, no, I'm not going to. My integrity is at stake here. I'm not going to do that. And I left that industry. So I was leaving that industry and going back to school. This kind of gets to your dating service thing. And I was looking for a job that I could do at night well, I could going to school during the day, and this company called Great Expectations was looking for a marketing manager to come in and run telemarketing rooms and build this up. And I'm like, well, I've done that for the last 3.5 years. I know how to do that.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into the dating business.
Hmm.
And then once I was there, I started seeing how successful some of these owners were and the lives they were having. And I was like, I think I could do that. Right. Let me learn this thing. And that's how I ended up in that business. So sorry, it was a long answer to your question, but there was more context.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So then your business after that was Renaissance for Singles. And that was something that you started from scratch?
Yeah. So I bought a franchise of a different company called Together Dating. And I bought it with a partner at the time named Steve Walken. And he was literally the first man who gave me a shot at business ownership, right? He just saw a young kid who was hungry and would work hard and say, hey, listen, I've got this problem in Seattle. I'll give you half of this one if you fix my problem, and then we'll build these others together. So I moved back up here. My wife now of almost 30 years, we moved back from California and came up and started getting into that business. Well, it wasn't very long later down the road when Together ended up on, I think it was Dateline or 2020, because the franchisor was lying to people. They were lying to clients, right? And they had them on camera. And I was like, what? I mean, because it was just something I would never do. So we ended up suing them and breaking our franchises away, the ones that we owned. And we had a bunch of other franchisees that came with us. Because we were some of the top performers in that industry and that franchise group. And then we went on to build a management training program and started expanding and opening our own stores. And that's when I joined EO, was back in December of 2000.
Yeah, talk about that. So I came up through the EO Accelerator program, which I don't think I would have gotten to EO qualified, which is 7 figures and above, if I hadn't been through that program. So I'm constantly fascinated by individuals that are able to get to that. But what attracted you to EO? You joined it in around 2000, so it's been 22 years now. What attracted you to it? What were you looking for?
So there were a lot of people who, honestly, I would tell you it was FOMO. Like I had some friends that were in, it was YEO at the time because we were young.
Yeah.
I had friends that were doing really cool things and I wasn't invited. Honestly, it was really, for me, it was like total FOMO. My business at the time was going really well. We had, I want to say, 15 or 20 offices around the country at the time. And I was making more money than I knew I could even possibly make. And it was like, everything was easy. And I was like, well, let's go do this thing. Right. And I joined EO and mostly for a social aspect. Right. And then I got in and it's been so much more. I didn't know what forum was. I didn't know, I wanted to learn. I wanted to be around people who were smarter than I was. I always innately knew that if I was the smartest person in the room, I was in the wrong room. I think my life has been a steady advancement of figuring out how to be the dumbest guy in the next room.
So that makes sense why you joined it. And then I'm curious, been in it for 22 years and you've risen up the ranks and now oversee the whole Western region. How has it stayed fresh for you over these years, over 22 years, and remained a integral part of your life, or has it kind of come and gone? Was there a period of time where it weren't as engaged?
That's a great question. So I'll say not being the dumbest person in the room is a low bar. So it's easier for me to find rooms that always have smarter people in it. And EO tends to have unlimited rooms of smart people. So for me, that is really, when I think of it, EO is really a community of communities, right? And it's a community of people who recognize that they're both the product and the consumer for the other members of the community. So when you think about that and unpack it a little bit, me meeting you enhances my life. So you're my product, right? I'm getting the chance to meet you. I'm getting the chance to appear on your show. I'm getting the chance to meet thousands of people who have interesting lives and great stories and windows into a world that I just don't have any experience with. So it's fascinating for me. So as you go up in leadership, and it's really just curating a larger community and drawing a bigger circle around all of these other communities. It's one of the things about the new logo I kind of like, right? I think of it as a bunch of circles of hugs. You just draw a bigger circle and more people fit in, you know?
Right.
And
Yeah.
to me, that's the way I tend to think of EO. I did have a period of time where in my first 10 years in EO, I didn't do anything but moderator. I was like a moderator and I was a forum guy. I had young kids. I didn't feel I had the time to get engaged. And I was actually at 1 foot out the door, and I would say 2009, maybe 2008, 2009. My forum moderator, who's a dear friend to this day, drove out an hour where I live a little bit further away from Seattle, and took me to lunch and said, "Listen, you know, I know you're on the edge," and I said, "Listen, here's the problem. You're not doing anything but going to forum. You're not going to events. You're just not doing anything." And he said, "Listen, I'll challenge you. If you get involved, if you do a global event, go to a university or sign up for something, you know, just go give your time a little bit. It'll change everything. And if it doesn't, I will pay your dues." That was his commitment to me. And Eric Huber was his name. And Eric, I took him up on the challenge, and I haven't looked back. So I've been in leadership. I've been to multiple universities. I've been to nearly every alchemy. I've done EMP, GLA, chaired RLAs. I've done everything you could imagine almost in this organization, and I love it. I just love it. It changed everything.
I often say, you know, it's much better to go deep within an organization rather than to go, you know, an inch deep and belong to 10 different organizations. And it sounds like that's what you've done. Chuck, I'm eyeing the clock. I know we have a hard stop in 5 minutes, and I rarely ever do this. I think I've maybe only done this one other time, but I'd love to make this a two-parter because I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. And maybe we can continue the conversation about EO and then get into Skynet Broadband and Attentus and some of your more recent stuff in a later conversation if you're up for it. I'm really enjoying this conversation. But talk to me a little bit about being chair of the West region, which is overseeing, I'm not sure how many chapters, 10 or 12 chapters
19,
or something.
19 chapters.
19 chapters.
Yeah.
You know, and overseeing a group of people that are all used to being El Jefe, used to being the boss, used to being the one who's in charge is no easy task. So talk a little bit about what attracts you to that role and what it's been like serving in that role.
It has truly been an honor. You know, I think every role I've been in as I've advanced and advanced, I like to think of EO as an inverted pyramid, right? I think of the member as the top piece of that, and the higher you go in the organization is just you're deeper into the support network of the member. Does that make sense? But every one of them, I've always felt the shoes were way too big when I first put my feet in them. And then you kind of grow into them and you get it. And that growth has helped me in leadership in so many ways. But I would say the thing that's the biggest difference in EO leadership than in my business is this idea of influence over power, right? All you have is influence. And when you have a lot of great leaders around you, you know, I think half of my board has bigger businesses than I do. And I think that's been true all the way through the time I've been in the organization. But what you get people who are, it's the passion, right? It's the OPP, right? Other people's passion. And a lot of the work is just trying to figure out how to utilize that passion where they're getting as much out of the opportunity that you're providing as the people they're serving, you know? So there's an alignment that has to be created. And I think really the thing with business owners is we all want agency. So how do you lead? By providing agency so people have their own decision-making spheres, and develop the pathway so it's super clear. Identify the target that they're trying to actually, what's the problem that they want to solve? EO to me, business owners are problem-solving machines. That's what we do, right? Many of us aren't great managers, but we're really good at solving problems. So if we can just define the problem well enough and define the scope of the problem and the tools that you have to bear on the problem and just get out of the way, then you're going to have great results and people are going to feel like they accomplished stuff. It's not about me. It's about how do I help someone else accomplish it? How do I give them the opportunity to grow? How do I build them up? And I have to say, one of the best honors I've had, my first regional leadership role was forum director. And I got to work with 18 chapters at the time. and therefore 16 chapters at the time, and they're forum chairs. Almost every one of those forum chairs, from a mentoring perspective, went on to be their chapter president. Many of them went on to serve in the regional or global committee structure. And most of my regional council today is made up of folks who I've been working with for the last 7 years, watching them grow and develop, and them helping me grow and develop, and me being able to take advantage of great leaders ahead of me, like Michelle Krippolani and Dave Anderson and Steve Conine. And, there's some wonderful people I've gotten to watch who are very different than me, that I've learned something from every single person.
Yeah. All right, Chuck, I'm going to cut you off there because I know you have a hard stop.
Yep.
Next time, I want to talk more about this idea of ending generational poverty, which you're really passionate about, and also some interesting things you did when you were raising your kids and how you helped them with managing money. I think that's really interesting. And also go into the next logical journey or step in your journey, which is from the dating space into IT services naturally, right?
Yeah, it's a perfect transition. Yeah,
exactly. So we'll get to that. And thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for listening. Be sure to check out the second episode.
Hey, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.